My husband's words that night changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. He said someone at my 7-year-old niece's birthday party shouldn't have been there, and when he told me who it was, I realized I'd been living a lie for years. I'm Zoe, and I'm a veterinary technician here in Phoenix. I spend my days caring for animals, helping them heal, protecting them from harm. I thought I was pretty good at spotting danger, at recognizing when something wasn't right, but I completely missed the predator who walked right into my family's backyard, shook my father's hand, and played games with my niece. My husband Trevor is a firefighter. He's seen things that would break most people, responded to calls that haunt him for weeks. He has this ability to read situations, to sense when something's wrong before anyone else notices. That day at the party, while I was focused on making sure everyone had cake, and my sister Maya was smiling for the first time in months, Trevor was watching a man I'd never seen before with the intensity of someone who recognized real danger. This man wasn't some random party crasher. He wasn't an awkward +1 or a friend of a friend who felt out of place. He was there with a purpose, and that purpose was my sister. He'd spent months planning this moment, carefully positioning himself to get close to our family, to gain our trust, to have access to the two people he wanted to hurt most. Maya is my younger sister, just 26, and she's been raising her daughter Lily alone since she was 19. She works as a graphic designer, creates beautiful things on her computer, and has this laugh that can fill an entire room. She's also been carrying a secret so heavy it was slowly crushing her spirit. And I was too busy being the helpful big sister to notice she was drowning. Our parents, Gloria and Vincent, had spent all morning preparing for this party. Mom works at the bank and loves any excuse to bring the family together. Dad's been retired from the Postal Service for 3 years now, and he's found his calling in being the world's most devoted grandfather. They transformed their backyard into a 7-year-old's dream, complete with a bounce house and homemade decorations. They had no idea they were about to welcome their granddaughter's potential abuser into their home. Lily, my niece, is everything pure and innocent in this world. She's 7 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, and believes that every adult in her life exists to protect her. She has no idea that some people wear masks, that some people who seem kind and funny and interested in her drawings might have terrible intentions. That afternoon, while Lily was opening presents and Maya was actually laughing with her friend Amber, a man named Derek was studying our family. He was learning our routines, our relationships, our weaknesses. He was planning his next move while eating my mother's homemade cake and complimenting my father's garden. And I was completely oblivious. I was worried about whether we had enough ice, whether the bounce house was safe, whether Maya's new haircut looked good in the family photos. I was playing the role of the organized older sister, while a predator was playing an entirely different game. Trevor tried to tell me something was wrong. I could see it in his face, in the way he kept stepping away to make phone calls, in the way he positioned himself between Derek and Lily whenever they were in the same area. But I was so focused on making sure the party was perfect that I dismissed his concerns as work stress. It wasn't until we were driving home, until Trevor's hands were shaking on the steering wheel and he told me we needed to have a serious conversation, that I realized our family had just been infiltrated by someone who'd been planning this moment for months. The man my sister's friend had brought to an innocent child's birthday party was the same man who had put bruises on Maya's arms 6 months earlier, the same man who had terrorized her so badly that she'd been too scared to tell her own family what happened, the same man who had been stalking her ever since, learning about her life, her relationships, her schedule. And now he knew where our parents lived. He knew what time Lily got out of school. He knew that Maya picked her up every Tuesday and Thursday. He knew our family traditions, our weekend routines, our blind spots. This is the story of how my husband's training as a first responder saved my sister's life, how a child's birthday party became the stage for a predator's carefully planned attack, and how our family learned that the most dangerous people are often the ones who work the hardest to seem safe. Before that terrifying revelation, my life felt beautifully predictable. I'd wake up every morning at 6, make coffee for Trevor and myself, and head to the Desert Valley Animal Clinic, where I'd spend my days bandaging paws, administering vaccines, and comforting scared pets. There's something deeply satisfying about helping creatures that can't speak for themselves, about being the gentle voice that calms a frightened dog or the steady hands that help an injured cat heal. Trevor and I had been married for 5 years, and we'd fallen into this comfortable rhythm that felt like home. He'd leave for the firehouse at 7, kissing me goodbye with that same tender smile he'd given me since our first date. We'd text throughout the day, sharing stories about difficult calls or funny moments with patients. Evenings were ours, spent planning our future, talking about opening my own pet grooming business, dreaming about the kids we wanted to have someday. My family was the foundation of everything good in my life. Every Sunday, we'd gather at Mom and Dad's house for dinner, a tradition that had somehow survived all of us becoming adults with our own complicated lives. Mom, Gloria, still worked at First National Bank after 22 years, and she had this incredible ability to make everyone feel welcome and fed. She'd spend Saturday evenings preparing these elaborate meals, claiming it was no trouble while secretly loving every minute of being needed. Dad, Vincent, had retired from the Postal Service 3 years ago, and retirement had transformed him from a quiet, hard-working man into someone who had time for long conversations and endless patience with his granddaughter. He'd spent his career walking the same neighborhoods, knowing every family's routine, every dog's temperament, every person who needed an extra moment of kindness. Now he channeled that same careful attention into being the grandfather Lily deserved. Maya lived just 10 minutes from our parents, in a small apartment she'd decorated with her own artwork and Lily's school projects. She worked for a design studio downtown, creating marketing materials for local businesses, and she was genuinely talented. Her portfolio was full of bright, creative work that somehow captured the personality of every client she worked with. But raising Lily alone had been harder than she'd ever expected, and I knew she sometimes felt like she was drowning in the responsibility. Lily was the light of our entire family. At 7 years old, she was this perfect combination of Maya's creativity and Dad's gentle curiosity. She'd spend hours drawing elaborate pictures of our family, always including our pets, always making sure everyone was smiling. She had this way of making every adult in her life feel like the most important person in the room, asking thoughtful questions about our jobs, our hobbies, our dreams. The birthday party had been planned for weeks. Mom had called me every few days with updates about decorations, cake flavors, and guest lists. She'd rented a bounce house, ordered custom balloons, and spent 3 days making homemade decorations that matched Lily's current obsession with butterflies. Dad had cleared his schedule completely, dedicating the entire weekend to setting up the backyard and making sure every detail was perfect. I'd arrived early that Saturday morning to help with setup, finding Mom already in full party mode, arranging flowers and setting up the dessert table. Dad was testing the bounce house for the 3rd time, making sure it was properly secured and safe. Maya arrived with Lily around 10, and I was struck by how genuinely happy my sister seemed. She'd been struggling lately, working long hours and seeming stressed about money, but that morning she was laughing easily and taking pictures of everything. The party was scheduled to start at noon, and guests began arriving right on time. Lily's friends from school came with their parents, most of whom we'd known for years through school events and neighborhood gatherings. Maya's co-workers from the design studio showed up with thoughtful gifts and genuine affection for Lily. Everything felt exactly as it should be, exactly as our family parties always felt. Trevor arrived directly from his shift at the firehouse, still carrying that particular energy that first responders have after 24 hours of high-stress calls. He kissed me hello, hugged Mom, and immediately joined Dad in monitoring the bounce house safety. This was typical Trevor behavior, always assessing potential hazards, always positioning himself where he could help if something went wrong. But as the afternoon progressed, I started noticing small changes in his demeanor. He kept stepping away to take phone calls, which wasn't unusual given his job, but these calls seemed different. He'd walk to the far corner of the yard, speak in low tones, and return looking more serious than before. When I asked about it, he'd just squeeze my hand and say everything was fine, but his eyes kept scanning the crowd with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Maya's friend Amber arrived around 1 o'clock with a man I'd never seen before. She introduced him as Derek, her new boyfriend, and he seemed perfectly normal. He was polite to my parents, complimented Mom's decorations, and showed genuine interest in Lily's butterfly drawings. He offered to help with party games, took pictures when asked, and generally behaved like any other guest. But Trevor watched him constantly, with the focused attention of someone who recognized a threat that no one else could see. The shift in Trevor's behavior was subtle at first, the kind of change only someone who knew him intimately would notice. He'd been moving through the party with his usual easy confidence, helping Dad adjust the bounce house anchors and making sure the elderly neighbors had comfortable chairs in the shade. But around 2 o'clock, something fundamental changed in his posture, in the way he held his shoulders, in the direction of his attention. I was refilling the lemonade pitcher when I caught him staring across the yard with an expression I'd only seen during his most serious emergency calls. His jaw was set, his hands slightly clenched, and there was this quality of controlled alertness that made my stomach tighten with worry. When I followed his gaze, I saw Derek kneeling beside Lily, helping her collect the scattered pieces of a puzzle that had fallen from the gift table. The scene looked perfectly innocent. Derek was smiling, speaking to Lily in gentle tones, carefully sorting the puzzle pieces by color the way any helpful adult might do. Lily was chattering away about butterflies and school projects, completely comfortable with this new person who was showing interest in her activities. From any other perspective, it was exactly the kind of intergenerational kindness that made family parties special. But Trevor's reaction told me there was something deeply wrong with this picture, something I couldn't see, but he could. The phone calls started getting more frequent after that. Trevor would step away from conversations mid-sentence, walking to the edge of the property where he could speak privately. Each time he returned, his expression was more troubled, more focused. When Mom asked if everything was okay at the firehouse, he gave her a reassuring smile and said they were just coordinating shift changes. But I could see the tension in his neck, the way he kept flexing his hands. Derek, meanwhile, was becoming more integrated into the party activities. He helped Dad move chairs, complimented Mom's cake decorating skills, and engaged Maya's coworkers in easy conversation about their design projects. He had this way of being helpful without being intrusive, of showing interest without being overwhelming. Everyone seemed to like him, and Amber kept smiling proudly whenever someone complimented her new boyfriend. Maya appeared genuinely relaxed for the first time in months. She was laughing at Dad's stories, taking pictures with her phone, and actually participating in conversations instead of just managing Lily's needs. Seeing her enjoy herself should have made me happy, but Trevor's increasing agitation was making it impossible for me to focus on anything positive. Around 3 o'clock, Trevor made another phone call, this one lasting nearly 10 minutes. When he returned, his face was pale and his hands were visibly shaking. He walked directly to where I was cleaning up wrapping paper and said quietly, "We need to leave soon." His voice had that careful control he used when delivering bad news to families at accident scenes. I asked what was wrong, but he just shook his head and said, "Not here. Too many people around." The formal tone scared me more than any explanation could have. This wasn't about work stress or shift scheduling. This was about something immediate and dangerous, something that required the kind of careful handling he reserved for life-threatening emergencies. The party continued around us, but I found myself watching Derek with new eyes, trying to understand what Trevor was seeing. Derek was currently sitting at the kids' table, showing genuine interest in 8-year-old conversations about Pokemon cards and playground politics. He remembered the names of Lily's friends, asked follow-up questions about their interests, and seemed completely at ease in this environment. But I noticed he kept positioning himself near Maya, not in an obvious way, but consistently. When she moved to help with cake cutting, he volunteered to assist. When she went inside to get more napkins, he offered to help carry supplies. When she sat down to rest, he found reasons to be in her general vicinity. The pattern was subtle, but persistent. And now that I was watching for it, it made my skin crawl. Trevor's final phone call came during the present opening ceremony. He walked to the far corner of the yard, spoke for less than 5 minutes, and returned looking like someone had just confirmed his worst fears. He sat down heavily beside me, his hand finding mine with a grip that was almost painful. "We're leaving as soon as it's polite," he said quietly. "And tonight I need to tell you something that's going to change how you see your family." His voice carried the weight of someone who had just received information that couldn't be ignored or postponed. The party wound down with its usual chaos of cleanup and goodbye hugs. Derek helped load leftover cake into containers, thanked my parents for their hospitality, and promised Lily he'd see her again soon. The casual way he made that promise, the certainty in his voice when he talked about future family events, made something cold settle in my chest. As we walked to our car, Trevor's hand never left my back, positioned protectively, ready to guide me away from whatever danger he'd identified. The 20-minute drive home felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life, filled with questions I was afraid to ask and answers I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. The drive home was suffocating in its silence. Trevor's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, and I could see the muscle in his jaw working as he processed whatever information he'd received during those phone calls. Every few blocks, he'd glance in the rearview mirror with the practiced awareness of someone checking for threats, a habit I'd never noticed before but now seemed loaded with significance. When we pulled into our driveway, Trevor sat motionless for a moment, staring at our front door like it represented some kind of sanctuary he wasn't sure we deserved. Then he turned to me with an expression I'd only seen once before, the night he'd come home from a call involving a house fire where they hadn't been able to save everyone inside. "Zoe, I need you to promise me something before we go inside," he said, his voice steady but strained. "I need you to promise that you'll listen to everything I have to say before you react. This is going to sound impossible, but I need you to trust me completely." Inside our living room, Trevor paced between the couch and the window, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I recognized as his way of processing trauma. He'd done the same thing after his first fatal car accident call, after the apartment fire that had claimed 3 children, after every situation where his professional training collided with his human heart. "That man at the party, Derek, the one dating Maya's friend Amber," he began, then stopped, shaking his head. "This is going to sound insane, but I know him. Not personally, but professionally. 6 months ago, my crew responded to a domestic violence call at an apartment complex on Mill Avenue. The address meant nothing to me, but Trevor's expression made it clear that this wasn't just another routine call he'd forgotten. This was something that had stayed with him, something significant enough to recognize a face months later at a crowded family party. When we arrived, we found a woman locked in her bathroom, terrified and injured. She was crying, had visible bruises on her arms and face, and kept saying she was sorry for calling us. The man we arrested that night was Derek. The woman was Maya. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my breath catch, my mind immediately rejecting what he was telling me. Maya told me everything. We talked every day. She would have told me if someone had hurt her, if she'd been scared, if she'd needed help. We were sisters. We were supposed to protect each other. "That's impossible," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I was remembering things that suddenly made terrible sense. Maya's reluctance to date anyone new, her jumpiness when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. The way she'd started avoiding evening plans, always having excuses about needing to be home with Lily. The gradual withdrawal I'd attributed to single motherhood stress. Trevor sat down across from me, his expression gentle but unyielding. "She begged us not to press charges. She said she was afraid of what would happen if we did, that she just wanted him to leave her alone. The officers took photos of her injuries, filed a report, but without her cooperation, they couldn't hold him long. He was released the next morning." The timeline was clicking into place now. 6 months ago, Maya had called in sick to work for 3 days. She'd claimed it was the flu, but when I'd offered to bring her soup, she'd insisted she was fine and just needed rest. She'd been quieter after that, more withdrawn, less likely to accept invitations to family gatherings. At the party today, I kept getting this feeling that I recognized him, but I couldn't place where from. So I called my captain, had him look up the incident report. Derek Morrison, 28 years old, personal trainer at 3 different gyms. The photos matched perfectly. Trevor pulled out his phone, showing me the official incident report he'd somehow managed to access. Maya's name was there, along with a description of injuries that made my stomach turn. Bruises on her arms consistent with being grabbed forcefully. A split lip, finger-shaped marks on her throat. "The worst part," Trevor continued, "is that this wasn't random. Derek had been stalking Maya for weeks before that incident. He'd figured out her schedule, her routine, where she worked. The assault happened because she'd finally told him to leave her alone." I was beginning to understand the true scope of what had happened at the party. Derek hadn't just shown up as Amber's casual boyfriend. He'd orchestrated the entire situation, somehow discovering Maya's connection to Amber and using that relationship to gain access to our family. "He was studying us today," I said, the realization making me feel sick, learning our routines, our relationships, where we live. Trevor nodded grimly. "He spent 20 minutes talking to your dad about his postal route. He asked your mom about her work schedule at the bank. He memorized details about Lily's school, her activities, her interests. This wasn't a social visit. This was reconnaissance." The decision crystallized in my mind with frightening clarity. We had to warn Maya immediately, regardless of how difficult the conversation would be. We had to protect Lily from someone who had already proven he was dangerous. And we had to do it tonight, before Derek could use the information he'd gathered to hurt the people I loved most. My hands were shaking as I dialed Maya's number. It was nearly 10 o'clock, well past Lily's bedtime, and I knew calling this late would immediately signal something was wrong. The phone rang twice before Maya answered, her voice already tense with worry. "Zoe? What's wrong? Is everyone okay?" "Maya, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. "That man who was at the party today, Derek, Amber's boyfriend, Trevor recognized him." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Maya finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "What did you say?" "Derek Morrison, 28 years old, personal trainer. 6 months ago, Trevor's crew responded to a domestic violence call at your apartment complex." The sound Maya made was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. I heard something crash in the background, like she'd dropped her phone or knocked something over. When she came back on the line, her voice was completely different, raw with terror and recognition. Oh God, he was there. He was at the party. He knows where Mom and Dad live. He knows about Lily. Her words came in rushed fragments, punctuated by breathing that sounded like she was hyperventilating. "Maya, honey, I need you to stay calm and tell me what happened. Trevor said you were hurt, that there was a police report, but you didn't press charges." "I couldn't press charges," she said, her voice breaking. "He told me if I did, he'd hurt Lily. He knew her school schedule, Zoe. He knew what time I picked her up, what route I took home. He said no one would believe me because we'd been on 3 dates and I'd invited him to my apartment." The picture was becoming clearer and more horrifying with each detail. Derek hadn't just assaulted my sister. He'd terrorized her into silence, used her love for her daughter as a weapon to ensure she wouldn't report him. "He's been following me ever since," Maya continued. "Different cars, different times, but always there. I changed my routine, started taking different routes to work, stopped going to places I used to love, but he always found me. Last month I saw him at Lily's school during pickup. He was just standing across the street, watching." Trevor took the phone from me, his voice switching into the calm, professional tone he used during emergencies. "Maya, this is Trevor. I need you to tell me exactly how he ended up at the party today. Did Amber know about your history with him?" "No." Maya's voice was emphatic. "I never told anyone what happened. I was too ashamed, too scared. Amber started dating him 2 months ago and kept talking about how sweet he was, how he'd asked so many questions about her friends and coworkers. She said he was really interested in getting to know the people who mattered to her." The manipulation was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. Derek had spent 2 months grooming Amber, learning about her social circle, specifically targeting her because of her connection to Maya. He'd probably researched Maya's entire family through social media, learning about our Sunday dinners, our family traditions, our relationships with each other. "He offered to help with everything today," Maya continued, her voice getting stronger as the full scope of his manipulation became clear. "He helped Dad move chairs, complimented Mom's cooking, played with Lily. He was gathering information about all of us." Trevor's jaw tightened. "Maya, we need to call this in immediately. This level of stalking and harassment is a felony. The fact that he violated the informal no-contact agreement by orchestrating this encounter makes it even more serious." "But what about Lily?" Maya's voice cracked. "What if he retaliates? What if he tries to hurt her to get back at me?" "That's exactly why we need to involve law enforcement now," Trevor said. "This isn't going to stop on its own. He's escalating, getting bolder. Today he gained access to your entire family, learned where your parents live, studied Lily's personality and interests. He's planning something bigger. I could hear Maya crying, the sound of someone who'd been carrying this terror alone for months, finally allowing herself to break down. I should have told you. I should have told someone. But I was so scared and I thought I could handle it myself. You were protecting Lily the only way you knew how, I said, taking the phone back. But now we're going to protect both of you the right way. Within an hour, our living room had become a crisis command center. Trevor had called his captain, who'd contacted the detective division. Maya had driven to our house with Lily, who was still asleep, confused but trusting that the adults would handle whatever was happening. Mom and Dad arrived shortly after, their faces pale with shock and fury. Dad, usually the calmest person I knew, was pacing the room with barely contained rage. Mom was holding Maya, both of them crying, both of them trying to process how someone had manipulated their way into their family celebration with such calculated malice. The detective who arrived at midnight was a woman named Officer Rodriguez, who specialized in stalking cases. She listened to Maya's story with professional compassion, took detailed notes, and immediately began the process of getting a restraining order and pursuing criminal charges. The good news, she said, is that we have a clear pattern of escalating behavior, multiple witnesses to today's incident, and his violation of the previous informal agreement. This is going to be a strong case. But the real victory was watching Maya finally allow herself to be protected, finally accepting that she didn't have to face this monster alone. The weeks that followed felt like watching our family learn to breathe again, after months of holding our breath without realizing it. Maya and Lily moved into Mom and Dad's house temporarily, transforming the guest room into a safe haven where my sister could finally sleep without checking the locks 3 times before bed. Dad installed motion sensor lights around the entire property and a security system that would have been overkill for anyone except a family that had just learned how vulnerable they really were. Derek was arrested within 48 hours of our report. Officer Rodriguez had been right about the strength of the case. His violation of the informal no-contact agreement, combined with the clear evidence of stalking and harassment, gave prosecutors everything they needed. But what really sealed his fate was what they found when they searched his apartment. Detailed notes about our family's routines, photographs taken from a distance of Maya and Lily, and a timeline of family events he'd somehow discovered through social media surveillance. The revelation that shook me most was learning how long Derek had been planning his infiltration of our family. He'd been watching Maya for 8 months, not 6. He'd known about Lily's birthday party before Amber had even been invited. He'd started dating Amber specifically because she worked with Maya, specifically because she had access to family information, specifically because she was the kind of trusting person who would proudly introduce her new boyfriend to her friend's family celebration. Amber was devastated when she learned the truth. She blamed herself for being manipulated, for not recognizing the red flags, for unwittingly becoming Derek's pathway to Maya and Lily. But Maya, in a display of grace that amazed all of us, refused to let Amber carry that guilt. "He's a predator," she told her friend. "Predators are experts at manipulation. You were a victim too." The hardest part was explaining to Lily why they couldn't go home yet, why there were police officers asking questions, why everyone seemed scared of someone she remembered as the nice man who'd helped her with her puzzle. We told her that sometimes adults make bad choices and other adults have to help keep everyone safe, which seemed to satisfy her 7-year-old understanding of justice without traumatizing her with details she was too young to process. Maya started therapy with a counselor who specialized in stalking victims, and for the first time in months, I watched my sister begin to reclaim pieces of herself she'd lost. She started laughing again, really laughing, not the careful, controlled version she'd been performing for our benefit. She began talking about future plans, about maybe taking that promotion at work, about feeling excited rather than terrified about tomorrow. The transformation in our family dynamics was profound. We'd always thought we were close, but we learned the difference between being close and being truly safe with each other. Mom stopped asking surface-level questions about how everyone was doing and started creating space for real conversations about fears, struggles, and needs. Dad, who'd always been quietly supportive, became actively protective in ways that made Maya feel defended rather than infantilized. Trevor and I grew closer through this crisis too. Watching him use his professional training to protect my family, seeing him recognize danger that the rest of us had missed, made me understand his work in a completely different way. He'd saved Maya and Lily not through dramatic heroics, but through careful attention, professional knowledge, and the courage to act on instincts that seemed impossible to explain. The court proceedings took 3 months, during which Derek remained in custody. His defense attorney tried to paint him as someone who'd simply made mistakes in pursuing a relationship, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury took less than 4 hours to convict him on multiple counts of stalking, harassment, and violating a protection order. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation, with a permanent restraining order. But the real healing happened in smaller moments. Maya teaching Lily to make Mom's famous chocolate chip cookies, while Dad told stories about his postal route adventures. Family dinners where we actually talked about difficult things instead of pretending everything was fine. Maya going on her first date in over a year with someone she'd met through friends who'd been thoroughly vetted by our entire protective family network. 6 months after that terrifying birthday party, we gathered again for Lily's school play. Maya was sitting between Mom and Dad, genuinely relaxed, taking pictures and cheering enthusiastically for her daughter. Trevor squeezed my hand as we watched Lily perform her lines with confident joy, completely unaware that her family had fought a battle to keep her safe. "You know what I learned from all this?" Maya said to me after the play, as we watched Lily collect congratulations from her classmates. "I learned that predators count on us being too polite, too trusting, too afraid of making scenes. They count on families like ours assuming the best about people instead of listening when something feels wrong." She was right. Derek had weaponized our family's kindness, our tendency to welcome newcomers, our reluctance to question someone who seemed nice and helpful. But he'd underestimated our capacity to fight for each other once we understood the threat. The most important lesson we learned was that protection isn't just about keeping bad things from happening. It's about creating families where people feel safe enough to tell the truth about bad things that have already happened. Maya had suffered in silence, not because she didn't trust us, but because she didn't want to burden us with her problems. Now we know better. We know that love means making space for difficult truths, that family means fighting for each other even when the enemy wears a friendly smile and brings birthday gifts. I hope our story reminds you that you're stronger than you think, that your family can survive difficult truths, and that asking for help is always the right choice when someone you love is in danger. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Your comment could be exactly what someone needs to find the courage to speak up about their own situation. And if you want to hear more stories about families overcoming impossible challenges, subscribe to this channel. We're building a community where difficult truths are met with support, not judgment. Remember, the most important conversations often happen after the party ends. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply ask someone you love if they're really okay. Thank you for listening. And please, always trust your instincts when something feels wrong. They might just save someone's life.